Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. In this module, we shall be discussing about biological invasion. The learning objectives of this module include the concept of biological invasion, different terminologies and hypotheses of biological invasion, the mechanism of invasion pathways that lead to biological invasion, the ecological, social and economic impacts of biological invasion. Dispersal and movement of species from one place to another place is a natural process and also important for the distribution of life in the world. Dispersal is one of the driver for evolution of species and responsible for life on a longer time scale. Generally, these dispersal and movement are confined to an area and often limited by multiple barriers, and these barriers include mountains, rivers, lakes, oceans and deserts. Species limited to such confined area are known as native species. Man had overcome all these barriers and distributed itself in every part of the world. The success of humans in evolutionary time scale is due to his mental skills and the capabilities to domesticate wild plants and animals in different parts of the world and utilize them. There are hundreds of plant species such as cereals like wheat, rice, etc., vegetables like potatoes, tomatoes, chilies, brinjal, etc., then commercial crops like groundnut, sugarcane, coffee, tea, etc., then medicinal plants like cinchona, aloe, ephedra, etc., and even animals. The examples of animals are like sheep, horses, cow, pigs, etc., which were always accompanied by man, transported and introduced from one place to another all around the world for his benefits. While the brighter side of invasion is the benefits and economic prospects of the new species introduced in non-native lands, but the darker side of biological invasion is that some species unintentionally accompanied with useful species such as weeds, pests, bacteria and viruses, and there may be many more species. These species created problems such as epidemics, famines, habitat destruction and homogenization of the biota. Weeds and pests, they impact agricultural yield, while human pathogens can directly linked with humans and it may cause millions of valuable lives. Some species escaped from cultivation lands, botanical gardens and other such human repositories and spread in the nearby forests and other habitat. These species always accompanied us and moved with the human movement to the new places. Globalization and fast, convenient means of transportation with intercontinental connection rapidly increased the distribution of hundreds and thousands of species intentionally or unintentionally worldwide. Species introduced to new habitat in a distant land outside their native range, separated through geographical barriers, are known as alien or exotic or non-native species. In the medieval period, pathogen, that is Yersinia pestis, which resides in mice and rats, caused plague and killed about 1/3 of the European population. The potato blight, you all know, caused by Phytophthora infestans. This is a fungus pathogen. This spread from North America and reduced the Irish population to half in size in 1840. The present time pandemic, AIDS, caused by human immunodeficiency virus, spread from Central Africa to the rest of the world and has infected 1% of the world population. Besides pathogens, animals like in mammals such as domestic cat, macaque, monkey, birds such as Indian myna, starling, and in plants as acacia, lantana and rubus are all included in 100 most worst invasive alien species list, and this list is compiled by Global Invasive Species Program, that is called as GISP. Every year many countries spend huge amount of money to manage and control these alien species. Biological invasion refers to the disruption of natural communities and ecosystems by increasing distribution and abundance of alien species outside the native range. Studies on biological invasion documented the role of alien species in extinction of native species, disruption of essential ecosystem processes, ill effects on human and animal health, and losses to economy of the region they invade. Thus, it is important to understand alien invasive species behavior and generate or develop strategies to manage alien invasive species. Dear students, I will suggest you, please try to read about the different alien species which are present in Himalayas in India. Now, let me have a look on the historical background. 18th century naturalists like Charles Darwin, Alphonse de Candolle and Joseph Hooker have mentioned invasive species. They studied these species more as a curiosity, as an adaptation of species in new environments rather than major threat to the global biodiversity. They studied about alien species or invasive species, but the purpose of their study was different rather than knowing the threats of these non-native species. Charles Darwin gave the first theory on the origin of species, whereas Alphonse de Candolle learned that floras gained by naturalization. Darwin, in the last edition of Asa Gray's Manual of the Flora of the Northern United States, enumerated 260 naturalized species that belonged to 162 genera. Charles Sutherland Elton in 1958 explained the typical pattern of biological invasion and wrote the book The Ecology of Invasions by Animals and Plants. He is considered as the founder of biological invasion concept. He was the first to realize that mixing of numerous organisms of different parts of the world will cause problems to the world. The Scientific Committee on Problems of the Environment, also called as SCOPE, of UNESCO in second half of the 1980s set a program to revisit the key assumption and journalized proposals in Elton's pioneering book and to review the current status of invasion in many parts of the world. The program was based on 3 questions. The first question was, what makes certain species more invasive than other? Second question was, what features of ecosystem make them susceptible to invasion? And third question was, how can we use such knowledge to manage biological invasion? Before we go into the detail, let me try to understand the terminologies and framework used in invasion. Now we are going to discuss the main terms that are used in the biological invasion one by one. The first term is alien species. Plant species whose occurrence in a given area is due to their introduction intentionally or accidentally as a result of human activity. The synonyms are exotic species to this alien species, introduced species, non-native species, non-indigenous species. They are also considered under this definition. Then casual species. Alien species that may flourish in an area but which don't persist for more than one life cycle without further introduction are called as casual species. Then naturalized species. Alien species that reproduce and sustain populations over more than one life cycle without direct intervention by humans or in spite of human interventions. They often recruit offspring freely, but often just near the adult species and do not necessarily invade natural, semi-natural or human-made ecosystems. Weeds. Weeds are the plant species, not necessarily alien. Those are undesirable from human point of view in gardens, agricultural fields, plantations, lawns, along the roadsides, etc. These are usually taxa with detectable economic or environmental effects. The synonyms of weeds are pests, harmful plants, problematic plants, etc. Then invasive species. Alien species that recruit reproductive offspring often in very large numbers at considerable distances from parent species and thus have the potential to spread at a considerable rate. Another term is propagule pressure, a composite measure of the number of individuals or propagules such as seeds released into region to which they are not native. It incorporates estimates of the absolute number of individuals involved in any one released event like propagule size and the number of discrete release, that is propagule number. As the number of released and or the number of individuals released increases and or time increase, propagule pressure also increases. The synonyms of this are introduction effort. Then transformer species, a subset of invasive species which change the character, condition, form or nature of ecosystem over a substantial area relative to the extent of that ecosystem. So these were some of the definitions or terms which are used in biological invasion. Now, let me have a look on the major hypotheses and theories related to biological invasion. There are multiple hypotheses to explain invasions, and researchers classified them in two categories. One is ecological hypothesis and second is evolutionary hypothesis. These hypotheses help to understand the species adaptation and establishment of a species in a non-native land. Williams and Fetter have proposed the 10's rule for a species to become invasive species in non-native land. This rule states that the probability of a species to become invasive is 10% at every stage from introduction to invasion. There are various hypotheses given by many researchers, most based on small subset of invasive species under particular environmental conditions, in which few became popular and discussed, whereas others were discarded. Many of these hypotheses work mutually on the species at different stages of adaptation and establishment in the new range. To understand the biological invasion, there is a need of daunting task which will be responsible for further explanation to understand the invasion in future. Let me discuss ecological hypothesis. These ecological hypotheses explain invasion and successful pre-adaptation in a new range with long association of humans and ecosystem modified by humans. Or some of the ecological hypotheses are explained in this table. The examples of the hypotheses are empty niche hypothesis, superior competitor hypothesis, superior predator hypothesis, novel weapon hypothesis, enemy release hypothesis, propagule pressure hypothesis. Let me have a look on the explanation of different hypotheses. Empty niche hypothesis, according to this, invasive species able to use resources not used by native species or used efficiently and create new ecological niche in a community. Superior competitor hypothesis, according to this hypothesis, invasive species are superior to native species, hence they utilize the resources and displace the native species. Then novel weapons hypothesis. According to this hypothesis, invasive species possesses chemical weapons that are novel to native inhabitant of the invaded community. Then enemy release hypothesis. According to this hypothesis, introduced species escaped from the pests of their native range, thus reduces the enemy in the introduced region. 84% fewer fungi and 24% fewer viruses species infect the introduced species in the naturalized range compared to native species. Then according to propagule pressure hypothesis, high supply and frequency of the plant propagule introductions increase chance of successful invasion due to high genetic diversity, seed swamping, continual supplementation, higher probability of introduction to favorable environment. Now, let me have a look on the evolutionary hypothesis. It is developed due to potential role of evolution are realized in the success of invasive species. Evolution contribute important role in the success of introduced species in relative fitness of the individuals in the population as compared to the native populations, leading to strong invasion. Like ecological hypothesis, here also several hypotheses are given and some of them are given in this table. The hypotheses are the evolution of increased competitive ability hypothesis, and according to this hypothesis, invader released from enemies in its native range could reallocate resources formerly used for defense to growth, reproduction and other attributes, generally increasing competitive ability. Another hypothesis is hybridization. According to this hypothesis, initially there is a decrease in fitness, but due to combination of selection and back crossing result in individuals with higher fitness than in the case for their hybridizing parents. The another hypothesis is founder effect. Founder effect that is associated with bottlenecks and convert epistatic variance into additive genetic variance and enhance the potential for a response to selection. If there is a multiple introduction of a species from different native origin, leads to strong bottlenecks in the population size and enhance variation among populations in the non-native range as compared to genetic variation in any native population. Let me discuss now different invasion pathways. Introduction of any species to non-native range requires the pathway or means to cross the geographical barriers such as oceans, deserts, rivers and mountain ranges, etc. Species sometimes pass these barriers through natural forces like storms, ocean currents or vectors like birds and animals. But their chances of overcoming these hurdles are very small, meager. Man is one of the most powerful driving force behind all the introduction of species in the non-native range. Throughout ancient times, humans always classified and selected the plant species according to their needs and exploited them. With the dawn of civilization and advancement in agriculture, traders, in between the civilization, human mobilize many alien species to distant lands and continents. In the last century, with increasing and fast means of traveling, human-aided introduction of species increased manifold by intentional and unintentional means. Many alien species established and naturalized in the non-native range, but few species spread in vast area and became threat to the local flora and fauna in that region. These species are known as invasive species. The whole set of processes that results in the introduction of an alien species from one geographical region to another with vectors including dispersal mechanism and means of introduction is defined as invasive pathways. The main pathways used by invasive species for their rapid spread in the local area are air, rivers, railway tracks, roads, and their dispersal by vectors like man by vehicles and ships, birds and animals from one region to other. The detailed analysis of human mediated introduction or pathways includes causes for introduction, vectors as physical means or agents for transportation, routes and corridors as geographic pathway for transportation. Horticulturists have always given higher preferences to alien species from native species, while native species are always valued by the ecologists and environmentalists. In case of invasion pathways, human beings are the prime vector responsible for transportation of invasive species through vehicles, ships and aeroplanes others than insects, birds and animals which disperse locally or occasionally long distances. Routes can be roads, railways, waterways, corridors and airways. In global invasive species database, invasive pathways are divided into 6 categories. Let me discuss them one by one. Release. Release in nature for use, biological control, erosion control, hunting and fishing in wild, improvement of landscape, fauna and for conservation and other unintentional release. Second is escape. Agriculture, botanical gardens, zoos, farmed animals, forestry, ornamental, horticulture, research facilities. From here, these invasive species may escape. Then transport and contamination. Contaminated nursery material, food contamination, contamination of plants, animals and seeds, trade and transportation of materials. Dear students, let you try to find out that by which mechanism this Congress grass and water hyacinth etc. have been introduced in India. The fourth pathway, transport, containers, bulk, ships, planes, vehicles and other means of transportation may be responsible for this. Then corridors, interconnected waterways, basins, seas, tunnels and land bridges, they come under the category of corridors by which invasion may take place. The sixth category is natural dispersal across borders. The phenomena of different ways invasive species arise in the non-native range are known as propagule pressure. The human activities such as intensifying agriculture, clearance of the forests for building road, railways, urbanization and overexploitation of native species for timber, fuel woods, food, fodder, medicine and other commercial activities are the main reasons behind the spread of alien invasive species. These activities create disturbance in the natural established ecosystems, hence creating pathway for the establishment of invasive species into further deep in the ecosystem. Human disturbance associated with 97% establishment of invasive species. Once the species survived in the non-native land and start producing new recruits, it further spread in the local area by different means of dispersal such as seeds, suckers, roots, propagules and cuttings. This slide shows the invasion mechanism. This framework developed to understand the process of invasion by Blackburn et al. In 2011 and published in Trends in Ecology and Evolution. Dear student, please have a very careful look on this pathway and try to understand the mechanism of biological invasion. First, widely accepted framework for biological invasion was given by Williamson and Fetter in 1996, whereas in case of animals, and Richardson in 2000 gave the framework for biological invasion in case of plants. Blackburn took base from Williamson and Fetter 1996 and Richardson 2005 and combined all other available framework to explain the mechanism of invasion. The invasion framework was the combination of barriers and stages. There are 5 vertical bars that signify barriers and 4 stages written above the bars in the framework proposed by Richardson. In invasion, the species has to overcome these barriers to pass into next stage. Blackburn added the additional barrier of captivity or cultivation after geographical barrier. The arrows signify the species flow towards next stage and letters in the arrow signify the name of the arrow, that is the categorization scheme for the population. He included the arrow B3 for the many species such as some plants, fungi, invertebrates, small fishes and other taxa which can skip captivity or cultivation barrier. The environmental barrier in Richardson's framework was replaced by survival barrier, which together with reproduction barrier helps in establishment stage. Once the species was established, it remained in C1 and C2 cycle to build enough population for dispersal to long distance. It was very important stage need to overcome by long distance dispersal for naturalized species to spread and successfully invade. Failure in any stage due to barrier is a failure for a species to become invader, that is shown in the diagram with the horizontal bar and the arrow. After the alien species had spread, it undergoes through boom and bust dynamics, which suggest the increase of the population to its peak and then decline. Terminologies were labeled in red color above the diagram, whereas management strategies were drawn in yellow arrow at different stages below the diagram. Conceptualization of invasion is a staged process and not a linear one. In every stage, number of species diminishes, explained as invasion failure and filtered to reach the next stage. Successful characters of invasive species: high ecological amplitude, that is, species have larger range of tolerance and can withstand various environmental conditions including long range of temperature, altitude, pH of soil, different terrains, etc. And the examples: superior competitor, short juvenile period, that is starts reproducing from very young age, high fecundity and various mode of reproduction. Diverse means of dispersal, for example, disperse seeds through the abiotic like wind, air and water, and biotic means like insects, animals and birds. Long distance dispersal. Least enemies in the non-native range, examples are enemy release hypothesis and the evolution of increased competitive ability hypothesis. Allelopathic effect. Novel weapon hypothesis is example of allelopathic effect. Gaining genetic diversity is example of hybridization and founder effect. Genetic and evolutionary aspect. Researchers believe that the evolution of increased competitiveness helps the invasive species to shift their resource allocation from the defense against natural enemies in outside their native range. A small amount of researchers had conducted the evolutionary studies of the invasive plants and sorted out the answer that certain genotypes within the invading population are more successful. The ability of exotic plants to establish and rapidly expand in a novel range is an evolved trait with underlying genetic characteristics in a population. To understand the genotypes, various studies have been conducted for genetic diversity of invasive species. Genetic variation occurs due to mutation, selection, gene flow, genetic drift and breeding system in a population over a time. In invasion, ecological adaptation is achieved by exotic species driven by colonization and subsequent invasion into complete novel range. Local selection occurred from genetically diverse population, which leads to fitness of the species in the new range, helps in the additive genetic variation. Many researchers have found that founder effect associated with the initial colonization of the species, which significantly reduce the genetic variation in invasive population. It might reduce their capacity to adapt in novel condition, which leads to reduced genetic diversity due to inbreeding, depression, limiting propagule production and population growth, whereas others suggest there have been a lag period between initial colonization and subsequent population of successful invader to rebuild the genetic diversity on which local population act for selection. Genetic variation is increased in the case of reintroduction of the invasive plant several times from diverse gene pool of its native range and due to hybridization of the invasive species with native plant species. However, on the basis of the studies on genetic diversity, it was not decided yet that increased genetic diversity leads to invasion, because there are many species which have shown invasive success due to low genetic diversity. It was found that cross-pollination plant species have high level of genetic variation within populations but genetic differentiation among populations is low, whereas self-pollinating species have less genetic variation within population and more diversity among populations. Some invasive plants have attained high genetic diversity within the invaded range, such as Flaris, Flaris species, then Alaria petiolata, then Puraria lobata and Euphorbia isula, where the historical records tell about their multiple introductions, which may be the source of such diversity. Other plant species invaded aggressively despite having little or no genetic diversity, such as Fallopia japonica, Polygonum cuspidatum. Invasive populations of alligator weed and water hyacinth in China are also reported to have very low levels of genetic diversity. Reason for these invasions suggested the rapid clonal spread and dispersal via root or stem fragments in these species for lack of genetic diversity and population genetic structure. Comparison of the genetic diversity of introduced and native population of invasive plant can pinpoint which native population is the source of invader and shows the loss of genetic diversity through founder effect. Diversity data is used to reconstruct invasion histories, reveal how a non-native plant adapts and expands into new territory, can also lead to more effective management strategies. Let me discuss ecological and socio-economic impacts. Threat to native flora and fauna, disruption of essential ecosystem, processes ill effects on human and animal health, losses to economy of the region they invade. Impacts of biological invasion can be measured onto two ways. One are direct impacts on ecosystem functions and on human welfare management and control cost of invasive species, plus side effects of introduction of biological control agent. One single species can have variety of effects on ecology, ecosystem services and socio-economic aspects. For example, in Cape region of South Africa, black wattle affects the water table, species composition and also recreational functions due to scarcity of water in rivers and lakes. Ecosystem services categorized into four main categories, and these categories are sporting services, which are necessary for the production of other ecosystem services, for example soil formation, nutrient cycling, primary production and habitat stability. Second is provisional services, and provisional services include the production of products obtained from ecosystem services, and examples are food, fuel, fresh water, genetic resources, etc. Third is regulating services. Regulating services are benefits supplied by self-maintained properties of ecosystems, for example water regulation, water purification, waste regulation, biological control, pollination, disease control, natural hazard protection and erosion regulation. And fourth services which are provided by the ecosystem are cultural services. Cultural services generate non-material benefits derived from ecosystems, and the examples are recreational services, aesthetic effects, educational services, and cultural diversity. Alien invasive species have been observed to disrupt all these type of ecosystem services which are directly or indirectly linked with human well-being. There are almost 500,000 species of plants, animals, and microbes have invaded in different countries of the world, in which 50,000 have been reported in US alone. Dear students, please study some books and try to find out that which species have invaded Himalayas and how they have disrupted or disrupting the ecosystem services. However, it is difficult to calculate the economic cost or economic loss caused by invasive species. Pimtel in 2005 had calculated that about 120 billion US dollar per year damage cost from the invasive alien species in US alone. Imagine how much damage is done in terms of currency all over the world. In Australia, the cost estimated is 13.6 billion US dollar per year, and cost is increasing with each financial year. Most evidence of economic impacts of invasive alien species comes from the developed world. Similarly, there are strong indications that the developing world is also experiencing similar problems due to invasive species. What is Global Invasive Species Program? Basically, this program was initiated in 1997 internationally to address the growing problems and effects of invasive species on both natural and managed ecosystem. It compiled the list of 100 worst alien invasive species which had caused trillions of US dollar damage to different countries, along with ecological and social impacts. Other important international initiatives related to biological invasion include Mountain Invasion Research Network (MIRAN) and assessing large scale risk for biodiversity with tested methods (ALARM), and delivering alien invasive species inventories for Europe, that is DAISY. The ultimate goal of all these initiatives is not only to control and eradicate invasive species, but the conservation of biological diversity, protection of human health, and prevention of economic losses. These goals can be achieved by ecosystem restoration through reintroducing the native species, preservation of undistributed ecosystem for the establishment of sustainable use by local people. Biological invasion studies programs are launched continentally, mostly by developed nations, but in India also such programs have been launched by Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. You please have a look on the website of National Mission on Himalayas, and over there you will find that Government of India is also concerned about biological invasion, and a number of projects in different universities or national research institutes are going on these aspects. Since the cost of these programs is so high, that developing and underdeveloped world are still not able to initiate these programs at very large scale. It is still a long way to go for preserving and restoring the ecosystem by saving them from biological invasion and restoring the ecosystem services to its normal cycle. Dear students, now let me summarize that what we have learned in this module. In this module, we have learnt about the concept of biological invasion. We have learnt about different terminologies that are used in biological invasion. We have learnt about biological invasion mechanism of biological invasion pathways of biological invasion, successful characters of alien invasive species, ecological, social and economic losses due to the spread of invasive species. I hope you have enjoyed this module. Thank you.